The mahogany desk gleamed under the soft glow of the corner office's floor-to-ceiling windows, and Adrian Steele sat perfectly still in his leather chair, watching the city lights flicker to life as dusk settled over Manhattan. At 42, he had built an empire from nothing. Steel Industries was worth $3 billion, and his name alone could make or break markets. But tonight, as he reviewed quarterly reports that showed nothing but success, there was an emptiness in his chest that no amount of achievement could fill. He had been married once, 15 years ago. It ended badly, the kind of ending that leaves scars so deep you stop believing in second chances. Since then, he had buried himself in work, cold negotiations, and calculated moves that turned competitors into memories. He was untouchable, invincible, and completely alone. The knock on his door pulled him from his thoughts. His assistant, Margaret, poked her head in with that apologetic expression she always wore when about to deliver bad news. Adrian didn't even look up from his desk. Margaret always wore that expression, and Margaret's bad news was usually just an inconvenience. "Your 5 o'clock is here," she said quietly. Adrian glanced at his watch. It was 5:17. "I don't have a 5 o'clock," he replied without emotion. "You do now," Margaret said, and there was something in her voice that made him finally look at her. She was nervous in a way he had rarely seen. He insisted, wouldn't take no for an answer. "Says it's about the Riverside project." Adrian's jaw tightened. The Riverside project was confidential. Only a full of people knew about it, and none of them should be walking into his office without an appointment. He was about to tell Margaret to have security remove whoever it was. When the man stepped into view behind her, the first thing Adrian noticed was the eyes. They were a striking shade of blue, almost impossibly bright. They held the kind of confidence that comes from someone who has never been told no and wouldn't accept it anyway. The man was younger, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair that fell slightly across his forehead and a jawline sharp enough to cut glass. He wore an expensive suit, tailored perfectly, and he moved with a kind of grace that suggested he knew exactly how much space he took up in the world. "You can go, Margaret," the man said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. Margaret looked at Adrian, who gave a curt nod. She left, closing the door softly behind her. Adrian stood slowly, deliberately, using every inch of his 6'3" frame as a power play. "I don't appreciate unannounced visitors," he said coldly, "and I don't appreciate confidential information being leaked, which is what must have happened for you to know about Riverside." The younger man smiled, and it was the kind of smile that suggested he found Adrian's irritation amusing. "I know about Riverside because my company helped develop the architectural framework for it. Blackwell Development. And before you have security throw me out, you should know that I hold 42% of the preliminary contracts." Adrian felt something shift in his chest, something he immediately recognized as dangerous. He had done his research on Riverside's development team. There was no Blackwell Development. There was no one named. He paused, realizing he didn't actually know this man's name. "Who the hell are you?" Adrian asked, and there was an edge to his voice now, something sharper than cold indifference. "Marcus Blackwell," the man said, extending his hand. "And I'm here because your company is about to make a catastrophic mistake with the Riverside project, and I'm the only person in this city who can stop it." Adrian didn't shake his hand. Instead, he walked around his desk and leaned against it, crossing his arms. Marcus Blackwell slowly lowered his hand, but that infuriating smile never wavered. "I've heard of every major development company in the tri-state area," Adrian said flatly. "I've never heard of Blackwell Development. That's because we operate quietly," Marcus replied, finally lowering his hand. "We don't advertise. We don't seek attention. We work with clients who value discretion and results. Your preliminary architectural plans for Riverside have a structural flaw that won't become apparent until the third phase of construction. By then, you'll have already sunk $200 million into something that will need to be completely redesigned. Adrian's instinct was to dismiss him as a fraud, to call security, and have him removed. But something in the way Marcus delivered the information with such casual certainty made him pause. More than that, something in the way Marcus looked at him, with those impossible blue eyes, made Adrian feel something he hadn't felt in years: vulnerability. And he hated it. If that were true, Adrian said carefully, "Why would you come here? Why not just let Steele Industries waste $200 million? Wouldn't that be better for your business?" Marcus stepped closer, and Adrian forced himself not to step back, not to show weakness. "Because," Marcus said quietly, "I don't want to see you fail." The words hung in the air between them, charged with something neither of them seemed ready to name. Adrian felt his pulse quicken, felt something dangerous awakening in his chest, something he had spent 15 years burying. He told himself it was just the shock of someone daring to walk into his office uninvited. He told himself it was anger. He told himself it was anything except what it actually was. "Sit down," Adrian commanded, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Marcus sat, and Adrian returned to his own chair, immediately creating distance between them. He needed distance. He needed to think clearly, and thinking clearly was becoming increasingly difficult. "Show me the flaw," Adrian said. For the next 2 hours, Marcus spread out blueprints across Adrian's desk, pointing out calculations and structural weaknesses that Adrian, despite his vast experience, had to admit he hadn't caught. The man was brilliant. The man was also, Adrian realized with growing horror, the most dangerous person to ever walk into his office. It wasn't just that Marcus was intelligent and beautiful and confident in a way that made Adrian feel like a teenager again. It was that Marcus seemed to see him. Not Adrian Steele, the CEO. Not Adrian Steele, the empire builder. But Adrian underneath all of it. Somewhere around 9 o'clock, when Marcus had finally explained everything in meticulous detail, Adrian found himself ordering dinner to be brought up. Marcus accepted without hesitation, and they continued talking, moving beyond the architectural discussions into business philosophy, into the nature of success, into the empty spaces that come with achievement. "You know what the problem with most successful people is," Marcus said, taking a bite of his pasta. They were sitting on opposite sides of Adrian's desk, but it felt like they were much closer. They mistake loneliness for focus. Adrian didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied the man across from him, trying to figure out what game was being played. Because surely this was a game. Beautiful men didn't walk into the offices of older, powerful men and make them feel things without an ulterior motive. "Why are you really here?" Adrian asked finally. Marcus set down his fork and met Adrian's eyes directly. "Because when I was researching Steele Industries for the Riverside project, I read about you. And I saw a photograph from a charity event from 5 years ago. You were standing alone. Even though you were surrounded by hundreds of people, you looked like the loneliest person in the room. I thought maybe I could change that." Adrian felt something crack inside his chest, some wall he had built so carefully over so many years. "That's insane," he said, but his voice was barely a whisper. "Yes," Marcus agreed, "but I'm here anyway." Outside, the city lights continued to flicker, indifferent to the moment happening in that corner office. Adrian Steele, who had spent 15 years convinced that he was incapable of feeling anything real, looked at Marcus Blackwell and felt everything at once. And for the first time, in a very long time, he didn't immediately run away from it. The next morning, Adrian woke up in his penthouse alone, which was exactly what should have happened. Marcus had left around midnight, after they had spent hours talking about everything and nothing, sitting on opposite sides of that mahogany desk, like two people trying to maintain the illusion that boundaries still existed between them. Adrian told himself it was fine. It was fine. One conversation with an attractive man meant nothing. It was a momentary lapse in judgment, a brief detour from the carefully constructed life he had built. By the time he arrived at his office, Adrian had almost convinced himself that he had overreacted. Almost. Margaret handed him his usual espresso without meeting his eyes, which meant she had already sensed the shift in his mood. Adrian was not a man who attracted attention through emotional displays. He was controlled, precise, almost surgical in his emotional distance. But something about yesterday had cracked that facade, and his staff could sense it. He spent the morning in meetings, reviewing the Riverside project with his architectural team and confirming everything Marcus had told him. The structural flaw was indeed real, and it would have been catastrophic, which meant Marcus hadn't been lying, which meant Marcus had driven across the city to warn him, not to manipulate him, which meant Adrian had no excuse for the way. His chest had tightened when Marcus had looked at him. By lunchtime, Adrian found himself pulling up the Blackwell development website. It was elegant, minimalist, almost deliberately understated. The portfolio was impressive, filled with projects that had been completed for private clients, all of them notable for their fuss innovation and their discretion. There was a contact page with a single email address and a phone number. Adrian stared at it for a full minute, telling himself he was being ridiculous. A 42-year-old man didn't obsess over someone he had just met. A 42-year-old man didn't feel his pulse quicken at the memory of blue eyes. A 42-year-old man didn't do any of the things Adrian was currently doing. He called the number. Marcus answered on the second ring, as if he had been waiting for the call, which was impossible. Except it didn't feel impossible. It felt inevitable. "I knew you'd call," Marcus said, and Adrian could hear the smile in his voice. "The structural issue I found isn't the only problem," Adrian said, falling back into the familiar territory of business discussion, because it was safer than acknowledging the real reason he had called. "There are 3 other potential weaknesses. I need you to look." It wasn't true. Adrian had already identified all the potential structural issues himself, but he needed a reason for Marcus to come back. "Email them to me, and I'll have my team review them," Marcus said. "Or I could come by tonight, go through them in person." The offer hung in the air between them, loaded with something that had nothing to do with architecture. 8 o'clock. Adrian heard himself say, "My office." After he hung up, Adrian sat in his chair for a long time, staring at the city beyond his windows. He had made a terrible mistake. He had opened a door that had been firmly closed for 15 years, and now he had no idea how to close it again. That evening, Adrian found himself doing something he hadn't done in years. He went to the office gym, showered, and changed into fresh clothes. He selected a charcoal gray suit instead of his usual black, then caught himself and almost changed it back. This was insane. He was acting like a man with something to prove, like a man trying to impress someone. He was Adrian Steele. He didn't try. He simply was. And yet, when Marcus walked into his office at 8:15 p.m., carrying a leather portfolio and wearing a dark blue sweater that brought out the color of his eyes, Adrian's carefully constructed composure began to crumble. They didn't look at the architectural plans for 20 minutes. Instead, they sat on the leather sofa in the corner of the office, and Marcus told Adrian about his company, about how he had started it, after leaving a major firm where he felt creatively stifled, about how he had built something meaningful from nothing. My father told me I was making a mistake, Marcus said, and there was old pain in his voice. He said that chasing dreams was for people without responsibilities. He said I was throwing away opportunities. When Blackwell development started succeeding, he never acknowledged it. When I tried to reconcile with him before he died, he still wouldn't look at me. Adrian listened and understood, on a level he had never articulated even to himself, what it meant to build something as a way of proving your worth to someone who would never be impressed. My ex-wife used to say that I loved the company more than I loved her. Adrian heard himself saying, she wasn't entirely wrong. But it was safer to love something that couldn't betray me. Marcus moved closer on the sofa, and Adrian didn't move away. Does it still feel safer? Marcus asked quietly. Adrian didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the man beside him, at the vulnerability in his expression, the way Marcus was offering something Adrian had convinced himself he was incapable of accepting. No, Adrian admitted finally. It doesn't feel safe at all. You feel terrifying. Marcus smiled. It was different from his earlier smiles. It was softer, more genuine, completely unguarded. I'm terrified too, he said. And then he kissed Adrian. It was gentle, questioning, the kind of kiss that asked permission rather than demanded it. Adrian had been kissed before, but never like this. Never with such tenderness, such absolute presence. He had been with people, but never with someone who seemed to see him so completely. When they finally pulled apart, Adrian felt like he had been shattered and reassembled into something new. Hey, I should probably warn you, Marcus said softly, still close enough that Adrian could feel his breath. This won't be simple. I've done the research on you too. You have walls higher than any building I've ever designed. You have control issues and trust issues and about 1,000 reasons why this is a terrible idea. I know, Adrian said, and I'm going to spend every day trying to break through those walls anyway. I'm going to drive you absolutely insane, and you're going to fight it every step of the way. Marcus paused, searching Adrian's face. But I think we both know what's about to happen between us. The question is whether you're brave enough to let it. Adrian had spent his entire adult life believing that courage meant standing alone, that strength meant isolation. But looking at Marcus, he wondered if maybe he had been wrong about that his entire life. Maybe courage meant the opposite. Maybe courage meant choosing to be vulnerable with someone else. Meant building something with another person, even though you knew it could fall apart. Stay, Adrian said. Not just for tonight. Stay with me. Marcus nodded, slowly. Okay, he whispered. I'll stay. 3 weeks later, Adrian stood in his office reviewing board materials while his phone buzzed with text messages. They were from Marcus, filled with photographs of architectural sites and terrible jokes and random observations about the way morning light hit certain buildings. Adrian found himself smiling at his desk like an idiot, which was not something that had ever happened before. His CFO, Richard Brennan, noticed Richard had been with Adrian for 12 years and could read him better than Adrian could read himself. He cornered Adrian in the executive bathroom and locked the door behind him, which was the kind of bold move only someone with seniority could make. You're sleeping with someone, Richard said without preamble. Adrian's jaw tightened. I don't see how that's relevant to quarterly earnings. It's relevant because you've been smiling. I have worked with you for 12 years, and I have never seen you smile like that. Also, your assistant mentioned that someone named Marcus has called you 17 times today. Adrian said nothing, which was confirmation enough. Richard leaned against the sink and crossed his arms. Please tell me it's not Marcus Blackwell, Richard said. Adrian's silence was answer enough. Christ, Adrian, do you understand what you're doing? Richard's voice was sharp now, worried. Marcus Blackwell is brilliant and he's successful, and yes, he's beautiful. But he's also dangerous. Not to the company, not in any obvious way, but to you personally. Adrian turned to face his friend. How is he dangerous? Because he's the kind of person who makes successful men do stupid things. It's the kind of buff purse who makes you want things other than power. And the moment you want something other than power, you become vulnerable. You become weak. Adrian felt something cold settle in his chest. Because Richards was right, and Adrian knew it. These past 3 weeks had been a slow erosion of every defense mechanism he had spent 15 years building. He had let Marcus into his apartment, into his office, into his life. And every moment he spent with Marcus made it harder to remember why he had needed those defenses in the first place. I don't know what you want me to say, Adrian said finally. I want you to say, you'll be careful. I want you to say you're not going to let this become a distraction. I want you to say you're going to remember who you are. And who am I? Adrian asked. You're Adrian Steele. You're a man who built an empire from nothing. You're a man who doesn't need anyone. Adrian looked at his friend, at the genuine concern in his expression, and felt a wave of exhaustion. Maybe I was wrong about that, Adrian said quietly. That night, Adrian couldn't focus. He had dinner planned with Marcus at Adrian's penthouse. Their first time actually going out publicly in the city. Well, not public exactly. Adrian had made reservations at a private restaurant, the kind of place where discretion was guaranteed and no photographs would be taken. But it was a step towards something more open, more real. When Marcus arrived, he was carrying flowers and wearing that expression that made Adrian forget every argument Richard had made about the dangers of vulnerability. You look stressed, Marcus said, setting the flowers on the counter and moving toward Adrian. Adrian let himself be pulled into an embrace, breathing in the familiar scent of Marcus's cologne. Work? Adrian lied. Just a difficult meeting. They had dinner on Adrian's balcony, overlooking the city, and Marcus told him about a new project, a residential building that would house community spaces for underprivileged youth. It was the kind of thing Marcus did often, apparently. He didn't just design buildings for profit. He designed spaces where people could be helped, where communities could be strengthened. It made Adrian feel shallow by comparison, his entire career dedicated to accumulating wealth and power. You're thinking too loud, Marcus said, reaching across the table to take Adrian's hand. I can practically hear you spiraling from here. Adrian pulled his hand away gently. Tell me something. What are you doing with me? That's a loaded question, Marcus said carefully. I'm serious. You're 32 years old. You're successful, brilliant, designing buildings that change communities. You could be with anyone. Why are you with someone like me? Someone who is emotionally unavailable, who has a failed marriage, who has spent the last 15 years convinced that feelings are just distractions. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying Adrian with those impossible blue eyes. Because underneath all of that, you're a good person. Because I can see the part of you that wants to be better, that wants to feel things, that wants to let someone in. Because when you smile at me, feels like winning something I've been trying to build my entire life. Adrian felt something dangerous rising in his chest. I'm going to hurt you, he said flatly. Probably, Marcus agreed. But I think it will be worth it. You shouldn't be so certain about me. Too late, Marcus said, smiling. I've already made my choice. That night, after they had moved to Adrian's bedroom, Adrian held Marcus while he slept and realized that he was in genuine trouble. He had spent so long protecting himself that he had forgotten how to live. And now, with Marcus in his arms. He was starting to remember, and it terrified him more than any business crisis ever could. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Adrian received a call from a lawyer informing him that his ex-wife was challenging their divorce settlement. She was claiming emotional abandonment, claiming that Adrian's obsession with work had destroyed their marriage and deserved to be punished financially. It was bullshit. Pure and simple. But it was the kind of bullshit that required attention. Adrian had wanted to keep his relationship with Marcus private for a reason. Not because he was ashamed, but because he knew that the moment his personal life became public, it would become a weapon. And sure enough, by midday, his lawyer was warning him that the opposing counsel was looking for ammunition. If they find out about Marcus, his lawyer said carefully, they could argue that your attention to a new relationship is preventing you from handling your affairs properly. It could affect the settlement. Adrian knew what he had to do. It was the choice he had always known he would eventually make. Attachment was a liability. Marcus was a liability. And Adrian Steele didn't keep liabilities around. Adrian made the decision to end it in the coldest way possible, which meant he made it, calculated every step, and gave himself no room for emotion to interfere. He drafted an email to Marcus, explaining that their relationship had been a mistake, that the demands of his company and his legal situation made any personal entanglement impossible, and that Marcus deserved someone who could give him the attention he required. He reread it 6 times before sending it, each time telling himself he was making the right choice. Protecting Marcus, protecting himself. That evening, when Marcus arrived at Adrian's office, expecting their usual dinner together, he found Adrian sitting at his desk in perfect professional attire, everything arranged to emphasize distance and formality. Marcus's expression changed the moment he walked in, the joy fading from his face as he seemed to understand what was about to happen. You got my email, Adrian said, not looking up from the documents he was pretending to review. Marcus closed the door behind him quietly. I got your email. I didn't believe it though. So I came here to have you say it to my face. Adrian finally looked at him, and it took every ounce of his considerable willpower not to break. Marcus looked like someone had dismantled him. Piece by piece, the confident bright man Adrian had come to know had been replaced by someone hurt and confused. This isn't working, Adrian said, making his voice as cold as possible. It was never going to work. I'm not capable of the kind of relationship you want. My legal situation is about to become complicated and messy. It's better if we end this now, before it gets worse. Marcus moved closer to Adrian's desk, his expression hardening. You're lying, he said flatly. I've learned your tells over the past few weeks. The way you press your thumb against your index finger when you're anxious. The way you look away when you're about to say something false. You just did both of those things. So, tell me the actual reason. Adrian stood, using his height as a power play, trying to intimidate Marcus into backing down. I don't owe you an explanation. I'm ending this. I want you to leave. Marcus didn't move. My father used to do this thing, Marcus said quietly. Whenever he was confronted with something that made him vulnerable, he would push people away. He'd tell them they were a mistake, that he couldn't give them what they deserved. All these noble reasons that were really just excuses to avoid feeling anything. And I watched him do it. I watched him destroy relationships and opportunities and his own life because he was too afraid to let anyone close. And I swore I would never be like him. Marcus stepped even closer. I thought you were different. I thought maybe you had actually learned from your mistakes. But you're doing exactly what he did, hiding behind logic and strategy and all these excuses because Being with me terrifies you. Adrian felt something break inside him, felt the careful control he had maintained for so long start to crack. You're right, he said, his voice rough. It does terrify me. You terrify me. Because 3 weeks ago, I didn't believe I was capable of caring about anyone, and now I can't stop thinking about you. Now I read architectural journals and think about how you would describe the buildings. Now I wake up and the first thing I do is check my phone for messages from you. Now I'm weak in ways I never thought I would be again, and I don't know how to be strong when you're around. Marcus's expression softened slightly. That's not weakness, he said. That's love. Adrian recoiled from the word like it was a physical blow. Don't, he said sharply. Don't use that word. Why not? Because if you acknowledge it, you have to believe it exists. You have to believe that you're capable of something other than destruction and isolation. Marcus moved to the window, looking out at the city. My lawyer called me today, Adrian said. My ex-wife is using my personal life as leverage in our settlement. She's going to make this messy and public and destructive. I can't have you caught in the middle of that. So that's it then, Marcus said, turning back to face him. You're going to push me away to protect me. How noble, how absolutely pathetic. It's practical, Adrian said coldly. Practicality is just cowardice dressed up in a suit, Marcus replied. He moved toward the door, and Adrian felt panic rising in his chest. Marcus, wait, no, Marcus said, turning back one final time. You know what the worst part is? I would have gone through all of it with you. The legal battles, the media attention, all of it. I would have stood beside you. But you decided without even asking me, without giving me the choice. You made the decision for both of us because you were scared. That's not love, Adrian. That's contempt. And then he was gone. And Adrian was left standing alone in his office with a view of the city that suddenly felt completely empty. The next 2 weeks were the longest of Adrian's life. He threw himself into work with an intensity that alarmed even his most dedicated employees. He worked 18-hour days, attended every meeting personally, made decisions with a speed and brutality that would normally have impressed his board, but now just seemed desperate. Richard tried to talk to him 3 times. Adrian shut him down each time with an arctic stare. Margaret stopped making eye contact. His assistants seemed to walk on eggshells around him. And every single moment, Adrian was aware of the absence. He noticed it most in small things. The way his office felt too quiet, the way his penthouse felt too large, the way his morning coffee tasted like nothing. He had deleted Marcus's number from his phone, but found himself dialing it from memory at 2 in the morning, hanging up before it could ring. He had disabled the notifications from Marcus's Instagram, but he still found himself checking it 17 times a day, looking at photographs of buildings that suddenly seemed hollow without Marcus's observations to accompany them. The legal battle with his ex-wife escalated faster than Adrian had anticipated. She filed a motion claiming emotional abandonment and psychological abuse. All bullshit, but bullshit that required extensive documentation to refute. Adrian's lawyer was building a case, interviewing employees, looking for evidence of Adrian's stable mental state and professional competence. One of those interviews was with Richard. Adrian found out about it only when Richard marched into his office and locked the door behind him. I quit, Richard said flatly. Adrian looked up from his desk. What? I quit. Effective immediately. I've spent 12 years watching you build this empire, and I've respected it. But I'm not going to be a tool in your destruction of the only good thing that's ever happened to you. Richard's voice was sharp with disgust. Do you know what I told your lawyer? I told him that in 12 years, I have never seen you happy until 3 weeks ago. I told him that you were a different person with Marcus, that you smiled, that you laughed, that you seemed like someone who actually wanted to live instead of just exist. Adrian stood, anger rising in him. You had no right. I had every right. Because you're making the biggest mistake of your life, and I'm not going to stand by and watch it happen. Richard moved toward the door. You pushed away the one person who could make you human again. And, for what? Your pride? Your fear? Your stupid need to control everything? After Richard left, Adrian sat in his office and realized that he had officially destroyed everything that mattered. His company was fine. His financial situation was secure. He had defended himself against his ex-wife's accusations. He had maintained control, and he had absolutely nothing. That night, Adrian did something he hadn't done since Marcus left. He went home early. His penthouse felt like a mausoleum. He poured himself a drink and stood on the balcony, looking out at the city. Finally allowed himself to feel the magnitude of his stupidity. His phone rang. Unknown number. Adrian answered, expecting a telemarketer or a lawyer. Instead, it was a woman's voice, warm and accented with something European. Mr. Steele? This is Catherine Blackwell, Marcus's mother. Adrian went very still. How did you get this number? My son gave it to me. Well, actually, son didn't give it to me. But he kept mentioning your name so many times that I looked you up and found your office number and convinced my daughter to help me track down your personal number. Do not ask how. I refuse to explain. Despite everything, Adrian felt the corners of his mouth twitch. Mrs. Blackwell, Catherine, please. I'm calling because my son is an idiot. But you, Mr. Steele, are a bigger idiot, and someone needs to tell you this. Adrian had no response to that. Marcus told me about your situation, about why you pushed him away. And I want you to know something. When my husband was alive, he was like you, afraid, controlled. He spent his whole life pushing away the people who loved him because he was terrified of being vulnerable, and he died alone, Mr. Steele. Rich, successful, surrounded by people who feared him, and absolutely alone. And when I look at my son, I see him becoming the same thing. Except he's also becoming heartbroken in the process. Catherine paused. I'm not calling to convince you to take Marcus back. That's his decision to make. I'm calling to tell you that the person you're afraid to be, the person who loves my son, that person is better than the one you've been for the past 2 weeks. I watched my son smile for the first time in years, and then I watched you take that away. So I want you to know what you destroyed. Adrian heard the phone as Catherine hung up. He sat with that conversation for hours, replaying her words, understanding finally what he had done. He had sacrificed happiness on the altar of control. He had chosen the familiar pain of isolation over the risk of genuine connection, and the worst part was that Marcus would probably never forgive him. Adrian arrived at the Blackwell development office building on a Tuesday morning. He had spent 3 days gathering the courage to make this trip, 3 days of planning what he would say, and 3 days of accepting that Marcus probably wouldn't want to hear any of it. The building itself was beautiful, exactly the kind of architecture Adrian would have expected from Marcus. Clean lines, purposeful spaces, a design that somehow managed to be both minimalist and warm. Marcus's assistant didn't recognize him, which was somehow worse than if she had. Adrian gave her his name and waited, feeling like a nervous teenager, instead of a 42-year-old man. Marcus didn't come immediately. He made Adrian wait for 30 minutes, which Adrian deserved. When Marcus finally appeared in the doorway of his office, there were shadows under his eyes, and his expression was carefully neutral. I'm not sure what you're doing here, Marcus said, not inviting Adrian inside. I came to apologize, Adrian said simply. And I came to tell you something I should have told you weeks ago. Marcus's jaw tightened. Adrian, I can't do this. I broke up with you to protect myself. Adrian continued, not letting Marcus interrupt. I told myself I was protecting you, but it was really about me. I was terrified of what you made me feel. I was terrified of being vulnerable. I was terrified of losing control. And instead of facing that fear, I did what I've always done. I built walls and told myself it was necessary. Adrian stepped closer, and this time, Marcus didn't back away. You asked me if I was brave enough to let you break through my walls. The answer is no. I'm not brave. I'm terrified. I'm still terrified right now. But I've spent the past 2 weeks being terrified anyway. Except instead of you being here to face it with me, I was just alone with it. And that was worse. Marcus looked away, and Adrian could see him fighting whatever he was feeling. Your ex-wife, Marcus said finally, your legal situation is being handled by lawyers, which is what lawyers do. My legal team doesn't need my personal happiness to be a casualty of that process. I was using it as an excuse because I was scared. Adrian moved closer still. I talked to your mother. A laugh escaped Marcus, sharp and slightly hysterical. You didn't. I did. She told me about your father, about how he pushed people away. And I realized that I was doing the same thing. I was becoming the person I promised myself I would never be. I was choosing isolation over risk. Adrian took a breath. I'm not asking you to take me back. I'm not expecting anything. I just came here to tell you that you were right about everything. About me being afraid. About this being worth the risk. About you being worth the risk. And I'm sorry that I was too much of a coward to see that before I hurt you. Marcus finally looked at him, and Adrian could see tears in his eyes, which was somehow worse than anger would have been. Do you have any idea what these past 2 weeks have been like? Marcus asked quietly. I told myself that I could just accept that you weren't capable of this, that you would always choose control. I told myself it was fine. It's not fine. I love you, Adrian. I love the parts of you that you're proud of and the parts of you that scare you. And losing you was like losing part of myself. Adrian felt something break and reform inside his chest. I love you too, he said, and it was the hardest thing he had ever said, and the easiest thing in the world at the same time. I'm terrified of it. I'm terrified of what it means. But not being able to feel it anymore was worse than being terrified of feeling it. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and pulled Adrian into his office, closing the door behind them. You have to understand something, Marcus said, his voice rough. If we do this, if we try this again, I'm not going to be patient. I'm not going to give you endless chances to push me away. You have to actually commit to this, to us completely. I know, Adrian said, and I'm ready. I'm still terrified, but I'm ready. Marcus kissed him then, hard and desperate, and full of all the things he hadn't been able to say. When they finally pulled apart, Adrian felt like he had been given a second chance at something he thought he had destroyed. They spent the rest of the day together. Not in Adrian's office, not in formal meetings, but simply talking. Marcus told Adrian about the projects he had lined up, about the community center he was designing in Brooklyn, about his dreams for his company. And Adrian listened, really listened, not as someone trying to problem solve, but as someone genuinely interested in the person he loved. That evening, Adrian did something he had never done before. He gave a press conference announcing his engagement to Marcus Blackwell. He spoke about love and vulnerability and the courage it took to trust someone completely. He spoke about overcoming his fear and choosing connection over isolation. By the next morning, every news outlet in the country was covering the story, and Adrian didn't care. For the first time in his life, he had chosen something other than control, and it felt like freedom.